Welcome back. I'm so excited about this one, Water as Witness in Poetry and Prose. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you know that even though we are gratefully accepting donations, you are watching this for free. And part of the reason that you can watch this for free for these next few days is through the generosity of sponsors such as Poets and Writers, who is providing support for 4 panels at this festival this year. So, to tell you a little bit more about Poets and Writers, we have Ricardo Hernandez. Welcome, Ricardo.
Hi, Megan. Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to join you all for today's panel. I'll be just sharing a couple of notes on poets and writers for maybe folks who are not familiar, and then I'll get out of the way to our featured event. So for those unfamiliar, Poets and Writers was actually founded in 1970. It's one of the largest nonprofit literary organizations in the US. We serve poets, fiction writers, and creative nonfiction writers. Our mission is to foster the professional development of poets and writers, to promote communication throughout the literary community, and to help create an environment in which literature can be appreciated by the widest possible public, such as today's event. So most of us know us by our organization's bi-monthly publication, Poets and Writers Magazine. I actually happen to have the current issue on hand with me. So Poets and Writers Magazine features essays on the literary life, profiles of contemporary authors, and the most comprehensive listing of literary grants, awards, deadlines, and prize winners available in print. Each issue reaches about 100,000 writers. So in addition to the print magazine, we also maintain an invaluable website, pw.org, which features select online content from the magazine. So these are, exclusives that are only available online. And of course, databases of literary mags and journals, small and independent presses, literary agents, MFA programs, writing contests, guides to literary places across the country, and a national literary events calendar. And of course, our other aspect of our organization is our Readings and Workshops mini grants program, which I help coordinate. So we provide support for poetry readings, fiction readings, and creative nonfiction readings, and or writing workshops in New York State, California, and 8 other cities across the US, including New Orleans. So if there are any questions or any information that you would like to see about anything that I've just mentioned, please visit pw.org. And you can find all of the resources I've outlined, as well as more in-depth details on how we can help you as both a reader and a writer. So I believe that's all I've got for today. Again, the website is pw.org. And thank you so much to Megan and all of the staff for making today's event possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you for your work and your continued uplifting of literature and literacy across the United States and the world. Speaking of literature, water is such a pervasive theme in literature. Just thinking off the top of my head, one of my favorite prose writers, Toni Morrison, the way she works with water in Beloved. One of my favorite poets, Langston Hughes, the way he works with water in Negro Speaks of Rivers. It's such a timeless theme. I know that sounds really hokey, but it absolutely is. So, here to talk about why water has permeated poetry and prose, we have Sean F. Munro, our moderator for today. He is an assistant professor of English at Delgado Community College in New Orleans. He has recent poems in Indiana Review, Split Lip Magazine, and Under a Warm Green Linden. He hosts a weekly poetry radio show, Lunch Poems, helps organize the New Orleans Poetry Festival, and co-curates a few reading series. Welcome, Sean. Take it away.
Hi there. Thank you, Megan, and thank you for watering the seeds and tending the garden of this festival. Welcome to the panel, Water as Witness, as Testimony, as Memory, as Symbol and Image, Water as System and History, as Grammar or Psychology, as Document, Water as Form and Content, Water that we live with and die by, Water more versatile than the word fuck, larger than language, yet contained by it. We'll hear from two fiction writers, Johnnie Bernhard and Desiree Evans, and two poets, Chioma Urama and Jack Bedell. And we'll float down this river in alphabetical order, with each writer reading a gulp of their work and responding to the panel's three central questions. How do authors use water to explore themes of witness and memory in their work? How does water lend itself to both worldly and spiritual themes? And how does water function both as a symbol and a tangible force, often simultaneously? After all four read and present, we'll open up the panel to questions and conversations. So here comes the deluge of bios for all four writers in the order they'll appear. First up is Jack B. Bedell, who is a professor of English and coordinator of creative writing at Southeastern Louisiana University, where he also edits Louisiana literature and directs Louisiana Literature Press. His latest collections are Color All Maps New by Mercer University Press in 2021, Rock Garden by Daily Drunk Press 2021, and No Brother This Storm, Mercer University Press 2018. His work has appeared in the Southern Review, Had, Radar Poetry, The Fourth River, Terrain.org, Construction, Grist, Sugar House, Shenandoah, Pigeonholes, Cotton Xenomorph, and other journals. Bedell is the recipient of the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities Individual Achievement in the Humanities Award and the Governor's Award for Artistic Achievement. He was appointed by Governor John Bell Edwards to serve as Louisiana Poet Laureate from 2017 to 2019. Next up, after Jack, a former English teacher and journalist, Johnnie Bernhard is passionate about reading and writing. A traditionally published author, her work has appeared in newspapers and magazines both nationally and internationally. She has written articles for columns for the Suburban Reporter of Houston, World Oil Magazine, the Mississippi Press, the International Word Among Us, Heart of Ann Arbor Magazine, Houston Style Magazine, and the Cowbird NPR production on Small Town America. Johnny's entry for Cowbird, The Last Mayberry, received 7,500 views nationally and internationally. Johnnie has several novels: A Good Girl, published by Texas Review Press, a second novel, How We Came to Be, and Sisters of the Undertow, Johnny's third novel. Johnny's work can also be found in the following anthologies: Louisiana Literature, Writers on Writing, The Pulpwood Queens Celebrate 20 Years, Katrina Memories, What Times Are These, and Coming Home. Additionally, Johnnie is the owner of Bernhard Editorial Services, LLC, where she assists writers in honing their craft. Up third is Desiree S. Evans, an award-winning writer, scholar, and activist from the Louisiana Bayou. She holds an MFA from the Missioners Center for Writers at the University of Texas at Austin. She also holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism and a master's degree in international affairs from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. Desiree's creative writing has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net. Her writing has appeared in literary journals such as Gulf Coast, The Offing, Nimrod Journal, Cosmonauts Avenue, and others. Her creative and scholarly work has received support from the Voices of Our Nation's Arts Foundation, Kimbilio Fiction, the Callaloo Creative Writing Workshop, the Money for Women Barbara Deming Memorial Fund, the Hurston Wright Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Austin Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. She is a 2020 winner of the Walter Dean Myers Grant, awarded by We Need Diverse Books. Desiree lives in New Orleans, where she is at work on her first novel. Lastly, but not leastly, Chioma Urama is a storyteller and visual artist of Igbo and African American heritage living in the global South. Her written work is a deeply meditative process connecting people, patterns, and ideas in efforts to heal herself and the collective. Her writing has been described as intuitive, intentional, and heart-connected. A Body of Water is Chioma Urama's debut collection of poetry. Her poetry and fiction have been published in the Southern Humanities Review, Pleiades, Blackbird, Paper Darts, The Normal School, and Prairie Schooner. She received a Fred Shaw Fiction Prize and an honorable mention from the Linda Wood Review Lyric Essay Contest. Urama is a Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship alumna and a graduate of the University of Miami MFA program, where she was a Missioner Fellow. She taught creative writing and English composition at the University of New Orleans. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate y'all's attendance and participation in this. Jack, I'll slide the camera over to you.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks, Megan. It's always an honor to appear at the Words of Music Festival. I wish we could be together in person, but this is the next best thing. So I appreciate being here. And also thanks to Johnnie, Desiree, and Chioma for sharing this moment with me. I appreciate that too. I thought I'd read 4 poems, start off with a new poem, and then 3 from my recent collection, Color All Maps New. I was hoping to say a few words before just to kind of address the issues of the panel and how water impacts my work and my life. I was just from the beginning, I was born and raised in Terrebonne Parish in Houma, and my parents said family have been there for generations. So I grew up surrounded by water. It was a blessing of my childhood. All our activities, our food, our fun, everything came from water. And so when I started writing, I was writing about home, and I was writing about that place and those people who I love and who raised me. And the place was water is inseparable from the place. So my early poems are full of water, but it's water not meaning anything, just water being what it is, which is the setting. And the more I came to encounter poets like Louisiana, Malika Favorite, or Alaskan Inuit poet Joden Kane, or the Hmong poet Maidavang's poems, I started to utilize water more as a symbol for time and of movement and of spirituality. And until in my later work, I think that I've grown into, like many of us, being concerned with the impact of coastal erosion on South Louisiana, particularly my home parish of Terrebonne. And that's become kind of the dominant theme of the last 3 books that I've written, is this notion of living through this coastal erosion to still love whatever's left of this place and to do our best to make it last and save it for generations, to restore it where we can. And I think that kind of sets the scene for these poems. And thank y'all for letting me get through that. This first poem is a fairly recent poem. It's called Ghost Forest, and it's based on a photograph by a photographer I'd consider probably the premier wetlands photographer Louisiana's produced, Frank Relly. And the photograph's name is Alhambra. Ghost Forest. 1. Backlit by city and refineries glow, these cypress bones shimmer on the still lake's surface. It's easy to see a storm's coming with the sky rolling gray overhead and the water glass calm. Even easier to know these trees have weathered some rough winds, their branches here and there pointing this away and that at what we've done to this place. Their trunks gather here like hoary Old Testament prophets come down from the mountain to rest in this body dump. Gold light hitting the moss, all luminol shine and whisper. 2. Water's the only thing that gets in here easily, pushed in by storms or poured through spillway gates. Years of its salt have loosened the coastline's faith, turned forest to roots and sawgrass, constant loss. This water rises, seeps, leaves doubt everywhere dirt should be. It's not worth lying down in the hull of your boat to scrape under the rail trellis if you're only coming here to see what it used to be. Do it so you can hear the ghost forest sing about what's coming next after the water's had its way. 3. What is moss if it isn't memory? It hangs off these branches, sways on the breeze like Merton's prayers. The closest these trees will get to needles again. Everything else here is dead still, waiting for the storm to blow in. No frog bellow, no heron flap, just moss waving and the water's slow rise to prove this place breathes. Stillness is faith, locust wine benediction here. And this moss knows all there is to know about holding on and air and how fully empty time is with all this water aching to fill it. Trunks, branches, sky bruising into storm. This next poem is called Gulf Waves. Big moon, breeze. My daughter hurries to finish her sentence in the sand before waves climb up on the shore like dogs sniffing panade meat. She wants to spell out the names of all the people she loves, but the closer the water gets, the more she knows she'll have to edit her list on the fly, leave some names behind in the air to beat the tide. It's hunger boundless and time. probably do need to set this one up. It's a poem called Ile de Jean Charles, and some of y'all may know about the climate refugees, the Biloxi tribe and the Houma Nation having to be moved out off their island, off Jean Charles, because they've lost 90% of it to coastal erosion, storm damage. And I wrote this poem after I saw an article in the New York Times about the issue, and they quoted Chief Nakan. And I've heard him speak several times, and he's a fairly sarcastic guy and has a good sense of humor. And when they mentioned in the news conference that there was going to be a nice buffer between the tribe and the current residents in the relocation spot, I think it kind of got under his skin a little bit. And he said that before it happens, he wants a live buffalo on the site, and that struck me. And I used that tone to write this poem. It's called Ile de Jean Charles. Forget about the taut lines stretched between forefinger and cast net. Forget about the densities of family and of time binding old ones to babies just learning to walk. Forget about the days spent working together after countless storms, salvaging the whole island's memories, spreading them out to dry in the sun. When the water finally takes the last 10% of this island, think only of Island Road, how the road once offered the one way to school or town or places past the horizon. Soon enough, there'll be no way back along this road. Anyone who drives around the barricade on the mainland will find waves at the end of blacktop, gulls floating over the ghost of rooftops, wind where there once was song. What more buffer could be built between here and there than this loss? What more to ease the tension of others? A live buffalo, perhaps? But no one could guarantee the animal would care to go on living so far from its rolling plains, or that it could stomach our mainland's sharp grass. I'll close with this poem, which is the title. Title comes from Color All Maps New, comes from this poem. It's titled Nuage, which y'all know is French for cloud. All along our coast, reeds are laid down by wind. One long cloud, gray to the horizon. Soft breeze and shallow surf, lowland my children will never see. Each tide a quiet goodbye. Pelicans refuse to leave their nests, closer together each season, their sand washing out to Gulf. Soon enough, storms will brew offshore, and water will color all maps new. Thank you. I didn't know whether, Sean, if you wanted me to discuss the issues for the panel or whether we should move on.
We can move on to Johnnie and come back to it at the end with the Q&A, a little conversation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Johnnie, you're up.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Megan. Special shout out to poets and writers for your financial backing that we could all be together. I've had the good fortune to be a part of Words and Music for many, many years. It's wonderful to hear Jack's poetry, and I welcome the colleagues on this panel. Water and Louisiana. It is a symbol that is in the blood, in the birth, in the food, in the music, in the poetry, in the prose. When listening to Jack's beautiful words, I kept thinking about Aaron Neville's song with the beautiful refrain, washing us away, Louisiana. I had lived in Morgan City. I had lived in Mandeville. My mother was born on Pecan Island, Vermilion Parish. They were trappers for many, many generations ago. I have memories of water and crab nets and food with family and fishing. The net making by my uncles, it's a part of me, it's a part of my writing. I want to talk to you just a little bit about Sisters of the Undertow. That's my third novel that came out in 2020. But like everything I write, there's always a hurricane. Lived through them, experienced them, and while I was living in Louisiana on the Texas Gulf Coast, and now I'm I'm speaking to you from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, not far from Biloxi, of course on the Gulf Coast, which sometimes I hear a reference spoken nationally that it is the third coast. It's not the third coast, it is the Gulf Coast. So with Sisters of the Undertow, if we look at the symbolism in that title, we're looking at the word undertow. And many times as a child, when I was with my cousins in Louisiana, and we might have a vacation in Grand Isle, which is at the very, very end of Louisiana, and the parking lots are full of oyster shells, and it's nature in its best presentation, without concrete, without Holiday Inns, without McDonald's. And it's very much a part of my childhood memory. But during that time, when I was with my cousins on the beach and our parents and my aunts and uncles and grandparents were watching us, before we went out to the water, they all said, be careful of the undertow, pay attention to the undertow. And we knew as small children that if we got out to a water that we were unfamiliar with, if we ventured past something that was familiar and safe, we could be swept into an undertow that is a strong current beneath the water, that if we were fortunate, we would be strong enough to fight it and save our lives. If we weren't strong enough as swimmers, we would be lost to that undertow. We would drown. We would be swept out to sea. So there's imagery in that, and of course the symbolism in the novel of sisters that are polar opposites, yin and yang, as they struggled through life. And I'd like to read you one of the last chapters of the novel. And I thought about this quite a bit, New Orleans, Louisiana, because you suffered so much in 2020, 2021 with hurricanes. Many of you have blue tarps on your roof. So this is a bit of love letter to you and what hurricanes do. That night, the storm still wasn't moving offshore, as tornadoes spun in the area and the water rose to the front and back doors of the house. A swollen Buffalo Bayou began flooding downtown. I moved everything of importance to me, the portrait of life, family pictures, medical records, insurance documents, to the top of the kitchen cabinets, along with canned food, a styrofoam ice chest, and bottled water. It was too late to get out of here, except if I swam out. I fought my fear with Sadie by my side. Brave girl, she never barked, not even when the water swallowed the kitchen table. We sat together on the kitchen countertops in the dark as the water inched toward us. I'd occasionally shine the flashlight into the black water. There in the darkness, two water moccasins, illuminated by the flashlight, swam slowly toward the kitchen countertops. Their cat-eye pupils and their large triangular heads steadied their gaze on Sadie. Her frantic barking, the raised hair on her back, only served as targets for them. I flashed the light quickly onto the kitchen cabinet tops, searching for something long-handled, something to push them away. Nothing, only canned goods, bottled water, and paperwork. One was more aggressive than the other. It came close enough for me to see dark stripes near its nostril and huge jowls. The grotesqueness of its thin neck, in contrast to its large head, caused my hands to shake as I threw a gallon of bottled water at it. The snake coiled, then exposed its inner mouth, white as cotton. "Get out of here!" I screamed into the dark kitchen, with a single ray of light shining on both snakes. In return, they hissed. Early dawn began to peek through the rain as I stared out of the lone kitchen window. It was a black sea under a sheet of rain falling from the sky. I reached for the ice chest on top of the cabinet where I'd stored bread and cellophane wrapped cheese slices. I fed Sadie the cheese and forced myself to eat 4 slices of bread. Next, I lowered her into the ice chest and placed her in the rising water in the kitchen, holding it with both hands just to make sure she could float in it. I picked the ice chest up with her in it and placed it on the countertop. Next, I got on my knees and eased the kitchen window open. I picked up the chest and reached as far as I could out in the window and dropped it into the water. Sadie made it. She was floating in it. I eased myself out of the window and let go of the ledge, dropping in the water next to her. I slightly touched the rim of the ice chest, speaking to her slowly. Sadie girl, we're gonna make it. We'll be all right. I kicked my feet slightly as we began to propel through the water. I fought from thinking what was below my feet, dead animals, garbage, raw sewage, maybe even bodies. I kicked until I grew tired, then I floated for a while. I set our direction on a utility pole I knew to be at the corner of Peace Street and St. Emmanuel. Sadie's little boat was continuously filling with rainwater, despite the frantic handfuls I tried to cup, then splash out of the container. I was getting tired, and I secretly cursed myself for allowing my body to get out of shape over the years. If only I began to sing in my head, there was someone else out here. I wondered if all of Houston, 5 million people, had drowned. Where was everyone? I made my destination of the first utility pole and pushed to the left, with my next destination being an on-ramp of the Gulf Freeway. Maybe there was help there. But once the streets became wider, the current became stronger. I tried and I tried, but the rain kept falling and the water became stronger than me. I kicked my feet. I splashed out the water in the ice chest, but it was replaced faster than I could remove it. I cried out to God, the God who had never answered me. Save me! I can't go on. I stopped kicking and looked at Sadie. Don't be afraid, girl. Don't be afraid. I closed my eyes and I let go of the ice chest. Are you an angel? No, ma'am. I'm with the Cajun Navy. I was underneath the black tarp, lying flat on my back. Rain was pelting me in the face. I could hear a little John boat motor of some kind, distant. You're lucky, lady. We spotted you right before you let go of that ice chest. Now lay still, ma'am. Gonna get you to a safe place. My dog, where's my dog? Got her right here. Come on, girl, easy now. Your mama needs you. He picked up Sadie and put her underneath the tarp. I held her tightly and began crying. You know, I just couldn't go anymore. I couldn't fight the water. Nothing to fight anymore, ma'am. Nothing to fight. So the novel contains many symbols of water. Water is rebirth. Water is baptism, particularly in the juxtaposition of a life-altering Category 5 hurricane, where people can either survive or perish in it. It could either make us better human beings or completely crush us. So that's Sisters of the Undertow. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnnie. That was heavy. Heavy and haunting. On to Desiree.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. I'll be reading from a piece of prose poetry today. It's a little combination of some of my genres. And I'll talk a little bit about the piece after I finish reading it. The Last Leaving, a migration in 11 parts. 1. Before the leaving, there is the staying. There are the days of in-betweens, sheltered in the arms of our mothers' mothers. There are the days when the floodwaters creep closer and closer, teasing, a dog lapping its tongue against our work-worn boots. August brings the big storms, days and weeks of long sideways rains that overflow the town's riverbeds and streams. We stand on the porch of our tumble-down homes, waiting, stranded in the middle of a newly birthed sea. The world narrows down to this: the drumbeat of water hitting the tin roof, the rattling of the windows as the winds come hard and frantic. Everywhere, everywhere, the sweet, heavy scent of rain. In September, we migrate north. 2. When the leaving comes, there are the things we forget to take. The sounds of the night awakening, our words whisking between the cypress, the crickets and the cicadas and bullfrogs sounding off like wild jazz under the moon. The tenor of days spent on land that is more water than ground, more magic than science. How during late evenings in the dying light, our breaths crackle like thunder, and our history moves in everything. We forget the way we once slept in the trees, the live oaks sheltering us with their thick arms. How as children we planted wishes in the soil where the roots were tucked away. How our secrets pulled at our earlobes, teasing us from the edges of a sweaty sleep. These are the nights made of our forgetting. 3. When the floodwaters come, we learned how to swim, paddling out with nothing but the clothes we wore on the Friday we left, our bellies full of cornmeal and milk. We float past each other on the road-turned river, and our faces are carnival masks, socketless eyes and crooked smiles. These are the things you remember to take with you: your mama's laughter, the golden shine of your daydreams, and the dark earth, the color of your skin. 4. What I remember is this: the winds came earlier that year, catching us as we walked through the overgrown yard, our short legs gone red with a swirl of delta dust. In the jungle of leaves, we ate at the flesh of melons and apples, while the sun warmed the skin of our backs for hours. It was a truth that would come to be better understood. We were leaving home. We were not going back home. Home would no longer be a place where the leaves would bend to the sound of our names, but somewhere that would come to know our silence. These were the days we spent looking at ourselves through mirrors. You pretended to smile, I pretended to laugh. But mostly I watched the way our reflections dangled there like a dream, and how our lips moved but no word sounded. This was the look of us leaving. This was the way we learned to part. 5. Listen, there was a sound that was only a sound in the oldest of stories. And in the oldest stories, there was always the river. There was the way the river ran its banks, and the way the new world flooded into being. Our migration story was also an origin story, the oldest story. 6. What I remember is this: we traveled the highways and the byways to places where the world was more red than green, more desert than water. We lost our way more than once. We sacrificed something to the miles. During the nights, we conjured familiar stars against the moving blackness of a new canopy sky. Grandmama's hair was still made from the gray moss from the oldest oak tree, flowing down a back made of red-brown roughened bark. Out here in the desert lands, there was a toughness to our skin, but all our organs were still soft and waterlogged, not made for a river too far from its source. We're not homeless, Mama said. She was a whisper in our ear in the dark of a new room, and because of her, we were not afraid. At night, we squeezed 5 to a bed in our cousin's house where everyone lived when there was nowhere else to live. We had nowhere else to live, but it was summer, and we were a mass of sweaty skins pressed together, and somehow we could fall asleep against each other in the empty dark. We were children still, and we were not afraid. In that new place, we became dark bodies twisting in the wind. Sometimes our morning painted us in fluorescent hues, reminding us of southern nights under star blankets, swimming through the humidity of our own breathing. In those moments, our world was still so alive, full of the mosquito hum and the cricket call, the sound of dust dancing at our feet. If we closed our eyes, we were still the children of fishermen and seamen, children of the water folk whose songs dwindled with the passing days. Listen, there was a long black highway and the bright, foolish moon, and all the ways we became untethered. 7. We're eating at a table that reminds us of the color of the muddy banks of the Mississippi. This new house is all white plaster and straight corners, and Mama is cooking dinner in the sharp fluorescent light of the kitchen. It washes her in yellow. We watch her, the way her hands stir the beans in the pot, the way her eyes seem to belong to someone else. She's not humming a song like the old days. She's holding back a whimper. She's moaning out a regret. She's becoming someone else. When we eat, we will pretend Mama's food tastes the same. We will run around afterward, sliding our bare feet across the bedroom floors that do not stay warm. We will settle into our beds and give prayer to the gods in the sky. Mama will wear her blue nightgown and sway in the kitchen light. She will stir her pot even after it is emptied, and she will whisper our names, but not remember why. There are so many things we've lost in the landing. 8. There is a jar Mama stores our memories in, a thick bottle that used to be for gathering water. I whisper into it some days, the tidbits of color I dream about, the pieces of song the wind carries to me, the words Mama speaks when she does not know I am listening. Sometimes we go outside to feel the rain, to feel the cool drops that cut like knives as they slide into our flesh. We feel the miles we've traveled in our bones, our blood vessels filled with river silt. We are memorizing our new land, and in the howling dark, we are wielding our teeth like swords. The secret is, the water holds what we cannot. 9. Some say we were born on a ship in the belly of an ocean where we could not see ourselves. We were born with seal skins and flippered feet, and in the moon-glow night, we slipped out of our chains to bury our dead in the darkest waters. We then looked up at the stars of our new world, and we carved maps into our skin so that our children could always know their way back home. In our bellies, we carry the names of all those who had lived before us, and on our tongues, the sounds of our old languages. There is no place we will go that will not know of where we've been. There is no place we will go that will not know our songs. 10. Because the land we come from has fallen into the sea, we are a lesson spoken of in a warning voice in a warming world, a cautionary tale for a not-so-distant future. We are fables. Our stories are scattered into hurricane gales, and our memories are plucked by a tornado spin. We are the children of Mercury summers and flooding seasons. 11. In our new habitats, we are learning to code our words. We are learning to hide ourselves. It feels safer this way, as if we haven't survived enough, as if we aren't haunted by the disappeared. We watch the skies and we wait in case the rains come again. We begin to collect things from each other, pictures, tickets, coins, rocks. We whisper our histories into the crowded corners of the couch cushions. And as a family, one by one, we carve our names into the foundation of a new home. We are everywhere now, flung across a country that never understood us. We recognize each other in the different ways we move, in the way the sun blisters our undisciplined skins. Our insides are drop-flung, our words are parched. In this new world, we will be forever thirsty. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk a little bit about sort of that piece and kind of about water in my work real quickly. So the piece I just read, The Last Migration, is a prose poem, but it's a bit of a meditation on exile and survival, on kind of recovery and memory, and kind of an attempt to explore family, land, and rising water in a state always at risk to climate disaster. In much of my work, like this piece, water so often bears witness, but it's also an active agent. In many ways, as a daughter of kind of rural South Louisiana, water for me has always been this kind of strange active force in my life, and it appears in so much of what I write, in the form of rain, thunderstorm, hurricane, as the river, as the bayou, as the Gulf. It is a foundation, a key part of my world building, not just a part of the geography itself, but as a character with an active role, a character that has something to say. Sometimes water is just a force of nature that human characters have to react to, but often it is a supernatural presence almost that haunts the background of a story. In a short story I wrote called Belly, the river and the natural world around the river are both life-giving and life-taking forces. They hold their own kind of sacred magic that moves throughout the story. So for me, in so many ways, water symbolizes the precarity of home. To live in a city, in a state in a community that is sinking daily. And for so many of us who live here in Louisiana on this kind of waterlogged soil, we do not know what the next storm season will bring. And as a writer, I continuously ask myself, what does it mean to live in a place that is sometimes more water than land? What is the connection between people and this place? What is the relationship to the land, to its history, to the weather, to the changing weather, and to the water that shapes our lives every day? So I'm really interested in thinking through this literature now, this literature of a changing climate, this literature of the Gulf South, of South Louisiana, which in many ways has become this sort of modern day sacrifice zone to the rising waters. And so thank you so much for listening to me in my piece today. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. Brought up some good topics we'll discuss here in a minute, but first, Chioma is up next.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I just want to take a moment to thank Words and Music Festival and Megan Holt and her genius for putting this event together. I also want to thank Poets and Writers for their support, and Johnnie, Desiree, and Jack. Like, what beautiful, beautiful work. I'm still processing everything that Desiree has just brought. So, whew. Thank you. And thank you so much, Sean, for moderating. My book, A Body of Water, which was recently published by UGA Press in 2021, this year, it examines the different aspects of my internal world through the lens of the marriage of my maternal grandmother and grandfather. And so I open the text with this quote from Toni Morrison that I will share. You know, they straightened out the Mississippi in places to make room for houses and livable acreage. Occasionally, the river floods these places. Floods is the word they use, but in fact is not flooding. It is remembering where it used to be. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. So the job of water is remembering. And this book for me was a process of remembering, understanding the experiences that my family members had moved through in order to bring me into this very space in the world. So I'm going to read a few pieces from my collection. The first one is called A Windowless Room. You set up tent in my throat, then built a fire. She pulls down her collar to show you the mark. Last winter, I was soaping my 10-year-old cousin's legs in the bath, and I realized that they were mine. Remember? Remember how they were? How much they wanted? Some part of me already chosen to continue on autonomously. If we can predict it, we can carve it out with a spoon and swallow. Last winter, I was soaping my legs, and I realized that they were mine. She is sitting in a windowless room. I repeat her name as if to summon a god. I am making her immortal. How often do you talk to your mother? I ask, some part of me on fire. I pull from her spoon and swallow. She's dead, she says, soaping the mark, tinting her legs, summoning a window carved for a god. Remember? The next piece I will read is about the stubbornness of holding on. I know I hold on to a lot, too much. I save shopping bags and paper boxes. I have a trunk full of recycling and drawings coated in glitter. I turn the words I've never said over and over in my head until they're smooth as river stones, and even then, I don't toss them. A list of things that give me pleasure, or redirecting my body toward pleasure. Fountain pens, fingers combing through a pile of sand, the space between a lover's chin and chest. Someone you love calling out to you in a crowded room. water threading through your scalp. The moon locking its eye on you. La luna como la leche y el cielo como las negritas. Wearing the same smile as your grandmother. The fullness of both hands. The salt of the ocean soaking the meanness out of your skin, returning you to soft, always this. Bathing in swollen rivers. Being held by the ground beneath a tree. A little boy called Junebug. Swan boats, purple kale, blood oranges, your dancing mouth, the curve of my collarbone, finding a tree to lay under. Pink, purple, and gold do-rags, revelations and warm showers, waves swelling with moonshine, buying golden and rust-colored plantains, standing on a piece of driftwood in the moonlight. The absence of fear after letting it consume your body like fire. A deep slumber as thick as molasses. Ginger tea. A stranger being the mother you need in the moment. The view of the volcano from the apartment. Plants quivering beneath a waterfall. Hot water and lemon. Lime and watermelon. A clean bed. Conversations with babies. Maracuya. Working from home. Slivers of moments when you witness a teenager through all the madness of adolescence. Allowing new emotions to bloom. Underneath moonlight now. Movement, my first love. The seducing light beyond the bridge of myself. Wind chime, circles, slowly. I will read one more piece. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time. Blue. I am in love with the self-possessed scrap of Florida sky from my occluded kitchen window. What a wonderful way to be propertied. And I think this is the spreading feeling my ancestors must have had when they looked up and took the name down for themselves. You see, I cannot think of blue without thinking of my grandmother, without thinking of my grandfather, who I only knew through the static of the VHS tape he sent me because he had never been taught to write. This is the spirit with which I was poured into the world. Blue is my first language, the ink my mother bathed me in, christened blue-black girl. My blue-black brother crying, crying. Blue is my lens, the pastoral violence of a Virginia childhood lulled to a swollen, yawning innocence when blanketed in this color. And I cannot write about blue without writing about Billy, without writing about swaying to the coppery rust of her voice on the patio under a broken fingernail of moon with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chioma. We can kind of bring everybody in now for the conversation. All right, all right. There was some brutal truth in those readings in that work today. Jack, we'll color all maps new. Chilling there. Desiree. I really enjoyed the line, more water than ground, more magic than science. Would y'all talk more about the kind of like golf house as a sacrifice zone? That was pretty intense, Desiree. I kind of can get hip to that as well. What do you think more about that?
About the idea of Louisiana. Can you? It's echoing in my. Hold on one second.
Let me try and mute mine and see if that helps.
So the idea of the Gulf in Louisiana as a sacrifice zone to climate disaster. Yeah, I mean, it's in many ways it's always been, it's It's a land so rich in resources, but it's been exploited by extractive industries for so many years, oil and gas industries. The waterways shifted and changed in order to accommodate those resourcing. And in so many ways, we are still being sacrificed for that as we see the rising waters, the sea level, the land loss on a daily basis, the communities year by year that are swallowed to the water. And I think that, we celebrate the beautiful and the beauty of Louisiana and its culture, but in so many ways, we are not prepared for what we're losing. And so it's something I think about on a daily basis. I think about what will be here in 50 years, what will be of our communities. It can't help but appear in so much of my work.
Are you working on a sci-fi novel, 300 Years in the Future? I think I read somewhere.
I am. I'm working on several different things, but I have a novel that is a sort of a speculative fiction literary novel that is imagining Louisiana in 200 years, or what remains of this place, and kind of bringing in some kind of folklore and natural aspects of the land, but also kind of the traditions of storytelling and what it looks like to survive in this place in a couple of hundred years. So it's been an interesting experience to kind of write into that sort of future.
What's the research like for a project like that?
A lot of it's, imagine, I read some books that are kind of predicting, in terms of geography, in terms of science, but a lot of it is also just imagining, as kind of the best speculative fiction does, right? And so I feel like it's half science, but also half just the kind of wonderful things that you can come up with in the kind of early hours of the morning and thinking about what would the world look like. And a lot of it's also just based on understanding history and what the world was before before we kind of made South Louisiana into the kind of place it is today. So what did it look like before when so much of the water and the land were just as it is, right? And so imagining the past, but also imagining in the future in those ways.
So this question kind of goes to everybody. Do y'all usually work with research in your writing? Of course, it all has to do with personal experience, but could y'all talk about some of the research you do when creating poems or fiction?
If I may, to my colleague Sean, I'm happy to answer that. There's a lot of research in all my novels, particularly in Systems of the Undertow, since we're talking about water and hurricanes. I wanted to write about the history of hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, the three that were the most deadly, the most destructive. There was the storm of 1900 in Galveston. If you ever want to read a nonfiction work based on what happened there, and the arrogance that allowed thousands of people to drown. Eric Larson is the author. It's called Isaac Storm. It's an excellent book. But I was able to tie in that storm with letting the characters visit places in Galveston that still existed. And my Louisiana friends, anyone on the Gulf Coast that has experienced it, Category 5, that water line in a building, in a school, in a home. Galveston is full of water line from that great storm of 1900. Lasker Inn, which is now a wedding venue today, if you ever go there and visit, it was a beautiful Victorian home that became an orphanage after the great storm of Galveston for many, many years, because, all these parents were lost and these children were without families and homes. And the water line, the watermark from that great storm is still in the lobby of the Lasker Inn. Then I went on to tie it into top 3 hurricanes, of course, is Katrina and loss of life and jobs and the suffering. And I have a homeless woman in the novel, Little Red Rambo, who makes the circuit of cities on the Gulf Coast, Biloxi, New Orleans, Houston, and she gets trapped in Houston after surviving Katrina just as Harvey comes along. So Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Katrina, and the great storm of 1900 were the most detrimental in loss of human life and property and suffering. So that's the research there. And also the smaller hurricanes that if we're lucky, it's just a Cat 1 and we're able to go outside and watch it because it becomes an event for us, doesn't it? We're all outside. If it comes in at night, we're in our pajamas as children. And, you know, my father was wonderful at saying, well, you know, that's the thing about a hurricane. It starts off from Africa and we never really know where it's going to come because of the wind and the currents. And then that storm takes on a mystery and a romantic point of view. And there's that juxtaposition. And I'm very curious about juxtaposition as a writer, that storm and loss of life and loss of courage. And we know after that last storm, especially 2020, you know, Zeta, and what happened to Lake Charles. And I do a lot of traveling. I call it the umbilical cord of I-10 connecting me to Louisiana and Texas. You know, you drive through I-10 in Lake Charles. That was 2 years ago. The devastation's still there. You may not see it on CBS Morning News anymore because that's a split second of the suffering somewhere and off to another place, but that suffering's still there. So that's the kind of research I do in the book. I like to bring in a lot of historical content and how people perhaps in the 19th, 20th century dealt with something as compared to the 21st.
So a lot of this, especially hurricane talk, is kind of depressing and gets people down and stuff. How do you find some joy to balance that out in your writing? This question goes to anybody. So of course we can't just be vehicles for sadness and kind of destruction, right? We got to kind of uplift too. How do y'all find yourselves doing that in your poems or your short stories?
Well, Sean, I can answer. My second to last book really asked a bunch of questions that disturb me, and because there aren't answers to a lot of the climate change that we're suffering right now, or any of the injustices that we're suffering right now. There's only effort and there's only awareness and openness to that information. And so, you know, I was distressed that my poems were so open-ended in my second to last collection. And in Color All Maps New, I made it a point to realize wherever we are, wherever we are in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we're going to have to find ways of loving that just like we love today. And we're going to have to find ways of celebrating that. And I hope that we're able to restore and preserve. But in the end, you know, home, it requires some hope and optimism. And I think that, you know, allowing my poems to focus on that, and that it's not just about depression or pessimism in writing or irony in writing, that sometimes we have to focus on love and celebration and hope. And I hope that's what's going on in my poems. And it is about awareness, I think, dovetailing with the research thing and dovetailing with Desiree's notion of what's going to be here in 300 years and using imagination. I have to tie hope to that imagination, because if we just look at the science isn't trending well. And I would think that, you know, with faith in humanity, we'll find a way to have some reason to love where we are in that many years, and making a point of trying my best to keep that on the front burner of the poems it's important to me.
If I may, and very, very quickly, Jack, you're absolutely right. Sometimes after great loss and devastation, you see people do something saintly beyond just the simple human. And to me, that was all the newscasts showing people with really nothing, driving down I-10, pulling a John boat, not knowing where they're going because it's the right thing to do to help someone. I think there's no greater celebration of what life means and what it truly means to be human, to think of others and to give in others in a time of need. And I'm sure everyone has stories of great loss, and it could be something other than a hurricane, and making the decision, because it is a choice, making the decision that I understand now what is important. It's certainly not those things that were washed away. It's my husband or my children or my parents are still here. It's life that what is important. And this is what the character in that last chapter, Kim's a very superficial person who's rested her entire life on her vanity, her classism, who is knocked to her knees, who has to lose absolutely everything to gain what it means to be a human being. And I think that's a choice many people are given. We could either see it as devastation at the end of life, and I love what Desiree is thinking about in this novel. What is this area going to be like in 200 years? And Jack's reply, we have to learn to love that, because that is what we have. It's the reality. So.
Chioma, you use some archives from North Carolina and stuff in your book, A Body of Water. Could you talk about how you use that to kind of heal the collective and yourself and stuff in your work?
Sorry, you were asking about how I use North Carolina specifically?
Kind of any research in your work. It doesn't necessarily have to be just about that poem in there.
Okay. Yeah, so one of the things that, and sorry, I hear feedback. I hope it's clear on your end. But one of the things when I start thinking about water is its association with the feminine, and how in the collective, the feminine is devalued and abused, right, within our current system. And so a lot of the process of writing this book for me was working within the feminine, right? So releasing a lot of the need to find logical historical records, right? Because at some point when you are looking for people who have been enslaved, a lot of those records are fragmented, right? There's a certain extent to which you can work. So I began to work more with the feminine, right? Working more with intuition and surrendering to the idea that there were limitations on what research could bring me. And I think that's one of the things that water as a force asks us to do, is really to surrender, right? And examining what that looks like for ourselves. It's hard to relinquish control. But as I began to do that in my writing, I began to receive more information and work more so with automatic writing and surrealist exercises to connect to information about my family that I used to process my own experiences and truths about our world. And so it was a very interesting process, learning how to surrender. And I think that's such an important thing for us to be thinking about right now within this present moment, is what can we let go of? How can we surrender?
Should we open it up to questions from the audience out there, if there are any? No questions yet. That's okay. Any things that y'all would like to say as closing comments? We got about 5 minutes left here. Anything you got on your mind you really want to get out your mind?
Well, I think I can speak to something we were talking about earlier about hope. What gives us hope in our writing? I can speak a little bit to that question. Just in general, writing as a kind of a model for community building, right? Writing in community, writing with community, reading and writing with community. I think a lot about that and how that is a tool for thinking about the present, thinking about our futures, right? A tool for futurism, right? A tool for not only educating and building this kind of sort of beloved community that is stronger together and working together to kind of create the worlds we want to see, but also as a place where we can intergenerationally have conversations about who we are as a people, where we want to go together, right? And so thinking a lot about that, based in Louisiana, knowing the issues that we face that are unique to the state, but are also prevalent in other places around the nation, thinking about how do we model, using literature and writing as a kind of a community building enterprise. In so many different ways. So I write both for adults and children. I'm working on a couple of children's books as well. And I think a lot about when I work with kids, about kind of how we are kind of using literature as a place where they can discover the world, but also think about who they want to be in the world. And that's true for adults too, but thinking a lot about like what we're leaving this generation, what they're going to be working with, the problems that will be unique in 50 to 60 years living in Louisiana. And so thinking about how literature becomes a space for activism.
I think that may be a wonderful place to end it right there. Thank you, Chioma. Thank you, Desiree. Thank you, Jack, Johnnie. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Poets and Writers in the Words and Music Festival. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you all. Snaps and claps and at-home love for the panelists. We will be back in just a few minutes, 23 to be exact, with Arts versus Artifacts, which is poets talking about what inspires them to create. We will see you soon. Thank you again to Poets and Writers and to all these amazing, wonderful readers, and to Sean for moderating.